Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
When you don't know any new jokes, you just go to the old jokes. So I've got good news and I've got bad news. The bad news is that Clark's not here today, so you'll have to listen to me for the next 30 minutes or so. But the good news is you're guaranteed not to hear me next Sunday. We will have no Sunday school, so you're good to go. And I just want to tell everybody that's watching us next Sunday. If you come tune in at 10 o'clock, you will not see anything from us. It's our Pastor Appreciation Sunday. We will start our service at 10:30. So just be sure to join with us if you're watching online at 10:30 and enjoy that service with us. And we always try to start lightly, and I always like to say that I think we don't thank him enough. I appreciate Clark. I appreciate what he does. It's hard work getting up here, and the hardest part is doing it every Sunday. You know, I do it once every 6 months or whatever, however often it is, and it's a lot of man, that's a lot of work. But think of it every Sunday, over and over and over, and he brings out the truth of the Word of God to us, as does Tim on Wednesday nights. It's a lot of hard work. We often forget that until we show up at 7 o'clock or at 10:20 on Sunday morning. So I want to thank him and thank Tim both. They do a great job doing this.
Very good.
And we need that truth from the Word of God. Without it, we can't grow in our own lives. And so I appreciate the sacrifices they make for me so that I can grow and do the things that I need to do. We're reading today in Isaiah chapter 39. And again, I feel like I do this every time. We all do it our own way. I have to do it with notes and start with a little context. So that's what I'm going to do. I apologize if that bores you, but that's the only way I know how to do this. I think we've talked about before, both Clark and I both when we stood up here, Isaiah is generally divided into two parts. This is the end of part one. This is the last chapter of part one. Starting next time that we're in Sunday school, Schofield describes it as part two, looking beyond the captivities. It's extremely prophecy-based, in other words, going forward. This is the last major chapter in Isaiah that deals with quote-unquote current events. And so that's kind of where we're at in Isaiah here. And another thing to remember, I think I described this last time I stood here, but Isaiah is the aged and the experienced man here. Again, Schofield dates the beginning of his ministry at about BC 760, more or less. These are, of course, rough time frames. If you look, most folks would date this particular chapter at around BC 710, 712. So 50 years into Isaiah's ministry. Don't know exactly when Isaiah started, assuming he started even as a young man. Say he started at 20. If you're 50 years in, that makes you 70, right? So this is not some young whippersnapper that's acting here as a part of Isaiah, and also a man who's seen a lot, who's been a lot. Again, Hezekiah is the last of the four kings that Isaiah ministered to. And Isaiah probably knew this was it. This was his last ride, and he knew it. And he had all the wisdom that comes with a lifetime of service to the Lord. I think it's also important to point out, again, this is another chapter about Hezekiah. That Clark's been spending the last few chapters talking about him, and we've talked about Hezekiah in our review of Kings and Chronicles back several years ago. But we know almost exactly how old Hezekiah is here as well. It's not just Isaiah that we know the age for, and I don't think the Bible does that by accident. I don't think anything's by accident. We know how old he is because we can put together from the narrative in 2 Kings. If you look at 2 Kings chapter 18, verse 2, and we'll start verse 1, and do verse 2 there. You can turn if you want, you let me read it to you. Now it came to pass in the 3rd year of Hoshea, son of Elah, king of Israel, that Hezekiah, the son of Ahaz, king of Judah, began to reign. 25 years old was he when he began to reign, and he reigned 29 years in Jerusalem. So Hezekiah was 25 when he started. He was 54 when he died. 29 years was the reign. We also know from last time that Hezekiah had an episode about midway through his reign where he was, quote, sick unto death. That's what we read about in the last chapter. And we know that initially, it's all the narrative, Isaiah went to him, initially said, look, get your house in order, you're going to die. Hezekiah turns his head to the wall, he prays. God tells Isaiah to turn around. He says, I'm going to give you 15 more years. And so it's a great story, but it also does some math for us. We know he was 54 when he died because he reigned 29 years and he started when he was 25. 54 minus 15, he was 39 when he was healed. And if you look in Isaiah 39, you're going to see this story happened just after that. I mean, However long it takes for information to travel from Judah to Babylon, that's about, and a guy to come back, that's about how long it took. So in other words, we have Isaiah, the aged man, at least 70, most likely. And then we have Hezekiah, the man that, I don't know, is a little older than me, about 40 years old, let's say, more or less. And I think that generational gap tells very much in this story. You've got a man, I don't know, right in the midpoint of his life, let's say at 40, he feels like he's got a long time left. He feels like he's just been healed. He feels all the vigor of that and what comes with it. And then you have Isaiah, the man who can see that he's nearer than farther, and who's dealing with the ramifications of that. And as I've told y'all many times before, the Bible is not full of two-dimensional people. We often want to make them that way, but we've got to understand they lived and died. They ate breakfast and supper just like we did. And we need to remember that. And that emotion will animate the story. And I think if you understand it and keep it in mind, you'll do better in understanding where we're at. And so with all that in mind, I thought about how to break it down, but I think I'm just going to read the entire chapter 39. It's only 8 verses. And then when we get done, we're going to turn to 2 Chronicles 32, 27 through 31. I will tell you, you can find this story in 3 places in the Bible. It is also in 2 Kings 20, 12 through 19. But if you compare 2 Kings 20, 12 through 19 to Isaiah 39, it's not word for word, but it's really, really close. I mean, it's told from a slightly different perspective, but even the words that Hezekiah says back and forth are very similar. And so I'm just going to tell you that and stipulate that is the same. 2 Chronicles gives a little bit more context, and so we're going to read it when we get done with Isaiah 39. But we will start by reading all 8 verses of Isaiah 39 in full, just to get a good picture. And you'll have to forgive me, I'm not good with Babylonian names, so I'll do the very best I can. At that time, Merodach-Baladan, the son of Babylon, king of Babylon, sent letters and a present to Hezekiah, for he had heard that he had been sick and was recovered. And Hezekiah was glad of them, and shewed them the house of his precious things, the silver, and the gold, and the spices, and the precious ointment, and all the house of his armor, and all that was found in his treasure. There was nothing in his house, nor in all his dominion, that Hezekiah shewed him not. Then came Isaiah the prophet unto King Hezekiah, and said unto them, What said these men, and from whence they came unto thee? And Hezekiah said, They are come from a far country unto me, even from Babylon. Then said he, What have they seen in thine house? And Hezekiah answered, All that is mine house have they seen. There is nothing among my treasures that I have not shewed them. Then said Isaiah to Hezekiah, Hear the word of the Lord of hosts. Behold, the days come, that all that is in thine house, and that which is thy father's have laid up in store unto this day, shall be carried to Babylon. Nothing shall be left, saith the Lord. And of thy sons that shall issue from thee, which thou shalt beget, shall they take away, and they shall be eunuchs in the palace of the king of Babylon. Then said Hezekiah unto Isaiah, Good is the word of the Lord which thou hast spoken. He said, Moreover, for there shall be peace and truth in my days.
John, before you turn, what is the difference in the word shewed and showed?
Well, I'll let my daddy correct me if I'm wrong. When I think of shoot, I think of more of an action word. It's when you show somebody something, maybe you show them intellectually how to do something, but when you shoot something, it's a different congregation of the same word, right? Is my understanding, and so it's more of an action. I took them, I walked with them, I grabbed them by the arm, and I shooed them, I think is the way I would best describe it. But if I have it wrong, please correct me. But that's my understanding of the difference between showed and shoot. It's also a Middle English, for lack of a better word. This was a 1611 translation, and that's why you have a slightly different congregation, I believe. That's my best understanding.
I'm better now.
All right. Now, I told you we wanted to go ahead and read. I would like for you to turn with me if you don't mind. Let's go ahead and turn to 2 Chronicles 32, and we're going to read 27 through 31 as well. And again, this is kind of a contemporary look alongside Isaiah, is what we're picking up here in 2 Chronicles 32. Again, we'll start with 27. And this is one of those things that I love about the Bible. I have read about Hezekiah many times. I forgot about the first few verses of this until I started reading it. We always think about the other parts of Hezekiah, but we can't forget about this part, because I think it weighs in here on 39. Schofield has a heading, Hezekiah's wealth. And Hezekiah had exceeding much riches and honor, and he made himself treasures for silver, and for gold, and for precious stones, and for spices, and for shields, and for all manner of pleasant jewels. Storehouses also for the increase of corn, and wine, and oil, and stalls for all manner of beasts, and coats for flocks. Moreover, he provided him cities, and possessions of flocks and herds in abundance, for God had given him substance very much. This same Hezekiah also stopped the upper watercourse of Gihon, and brought it straight down to the west side of the city of David. And Hezekiah prospered in all his works. Now pay close attention to 31. This is the only verse that directly references the visit from the emissaries from Babylon. Howbeit, in the business of the ambassadors of the prince of Babylon, who sent unto him to inquire of the wonder that was done in the land, God left him to try him, that he might know all that was in his heart. And so let's zoom out and we'll go through the story here slowly. We have spent quite a bit of time talking about Hezekiah's success and success through the Lord in the last 3 chapters, and rightfully so. I think if you look at the history of Judah's kingdom, I think in the post-Solomon era, there was no king more successful than Hezekiah. And there was good reason for it. There was no king who trusted the Lord more than Hezekiah. And so he was blessed richly by that faith. And he had success, I said, spiritually, politically, physically, and materially through God. He experienced spiritual success. I refer you to 2 Kings 18, 4 through 7. That's at the beginning of his reign. I'll read it to you real quick so you don't have to. But I want you to see it's not just me pulling it out, because the Lord really convicted me about this, and I'm hoping I can get it out to you. It's speaking of the revival under Hezekiah. According to, I love that word revival. It's us, right? Revival under Hezekiah, according to Schofield. He, being Hezekiah, removed the high places, and brake the images, and cut down the groves, and brake in pieces the brazen serpent that Moses had made. For unto these days the children of Israel did burn incense to it, and called it Nehushtan. And he trusted in the Lord God of Israel, so that after him was none like him among all the kings of Judah, nor any that were before him. I think verse 5 backs up what I just said about him with regard to his kingdom. For he clave to the Lord, and departed not from following him, but kept his commandments, which the Lord commanded Moses. And the Lord was with him, and he prospered whithersoever he went forth. And he rebelled against the king of Assyria, and served him not. What a great testimony, by the way, verses 5 and 6. I hope when I get to the end, somebody can say that about me, that I live that way. I know I won't, but I hope that I could. He trusted in the Lord God of Israel, so that after him was none like him among all the kings. 6, for he clave to the Lord, and departed not from following him. What a great testimony, right? Because that's as good as it gets. And that shows you the spiritual success that Hezekiah had through the Lord. But he didn't just have spiritual success. He had political success. Look at 2 Kings 19:35. We spent quite a bit of time talking about this story already. That's not the right reference. Give me just a minute, I'll find it. 20:35. No, it's 19. I'm sorry. 2 Kings 19:35. I'll get it right. I'm sorry. And we're going to the summary verse here after Sennacherib has come and besieged the city. Y'all remember the story. We've gone over it the last 2 Sundays. But to just reiterate, and it came to pass that night that the angel of the Lord went out and smote in the camp of the Assyrians 145,000. When they arose early in the morning, behold, they were all dead corpses. That was a military success. It was also a political success. That was Hezekiah showing the world that he could stand up to the most powerful country in the world. Through God, he could do that. Hezekiah was a political success. He was also a physical success through the Lord. Look at 2 Kings chapter 20 and read verses 5 and 6. We've talked about this. Turn again and tell Hezekiah, the captain of my people, thus saith the Lord, the God of David thy father, I have heard thy prayer. I have seen thy tears. Behold, I will heal thee. On the 3rd day thou shalt go up unto the house of the Lord, and I will add unto thy days 15 years. He was a physical success. That's where he was at the time of this story. He also was a material success, as we just read to you in 2 Corinthians 32, 27 through 30, Hezekiah had exceeding much riches and honor. It seems to me, just from the explanation given, Hezekiah was the richest Judean king since Solomon. He had the material wealth to prove that he had the blessings of the Lord. So Hezekiah was flushed with success. He was 39 or 40 years old, and he was on the mountaintop, let's say. That's where he was. And if any man had served the Lord, the Bible says he did, had any man been rewarded by the Lord, Hezekiah was that man. Until here we are, and we see Hezekiah also had weaknesses, which we all have. And I point to three. The first weakness that I see in Isaiah 39, Hezekiah had pride. And I think if you look there in verse 2, we see in verse 1 that he received these emissaries from Babylon. And what does verse 2 say? And Hezekiah was glad of them. He was glad to be recognized. He was glad to be. See, again, when we think of Babylon, we think of the Babylon in Daniel. But that's not where Babylon was right now. Assyria was the ascendant kingdom at that time. Babylon, as far as Hezekiah was concerned, was on his level. This was his peer. This was somebody that he was bragging a little bit. He said, look what I... But, and again, look at the pronouns are always important. Look at the pronouns that he was glad of them and showed them the house of his precious things, the silver and the gold and the spices and the precious ointment and all the house of his armor and all that was found in his treasures. There was nothing in his house nor in all his dominion that Hezekiah shewed them not. You see the emphasis of third person his. You also see what he doesn't do. Do you see anywhere in Isaiah 39 where he pointed to Babylon and said, look what God's done for me. Right. Show me where he did that. He did not do it. Instead, what he did was say, look what I've done. Look what I've done. I threw the Assyrians off of my gate. I have built this well. I built this dam to bring water to my people. I have got riches beyond all imagination. Look at me. Look at me. And that's something we all have a problem with. I do. I have to fight pride. Maybe I'm the only one here, but I do. Oh me. And even a man, and again, I just read you the testimony of Hezekiah. That was the way he was remembered as a man who followed God. This was not a bad man. This was a good man, but he had pride. And that pride caused him to make a terrible, terrible mistake that haunted his family for generations to destroy them. That's what a good man's sin could do. That's what a good man's sin could do. The second thing I point out is akin to pride. He was self-absorbed. Again, you don't see him talking about what his people did for him. You don't see him talking about what the Lord did for him or how circumstances work. No, this is all about me. It's about me. I'm thinking about how I am right now. Not what could this do for my kingdom tomorrow. Not what would the Lord have. You don't see Hezekiah going to the Lord through Isaiah and saying, how should I approach this problem? How should I approach these emissaries? That would have probably been the right thing to do, right? And Hezekiah knew this. We know he knew it because when he got in trouble before, where did he go? When Sennacherib came with 185,000 folks, he spread it out before the Lord. He went to the temple and he said, God, I need you. That's where he was. And when he was sick unto death, what did he do? He turned his face to the wall and prayed. But this didn't seem like one of those problems to him. And in his pride, I've got this. This is just political stuff. This is what kings do, and I can do this. He was self-absorbed. I can handle this. That's what happens. We all when it gets hard. When I'm on my knees, I always pray. It's force of habit, right? I think we all do that. But what do we do day to day? Do we reach out day to day? Lord, what's the best way to handle this problem I have at work? Lord, what's the best way to handle this issue I have in my family? Lord, in this business transaction, what should I do? Again, oh me. I find myself, I'll think through everything, and it'll take me a good few days before I remember, maybe I'll pray about that. Maybe it will go better if I shouldn't be that way. I should pray first. I pray last. I should pray in the middle. And I think if Hezekiah had done that, and he went to Isaiah, there would have been a very different outcome here in Isaiah 39. And I think it would have, in part, changed the course of history, but he did not do so. And then finally, there was, to me, what I think is the worst of the three frailties here. There's a lack of vision. And I point you to verse 8. I know I'm getting a little bit out of order, but y'all heard the story. You've heard it before. I think the worst indictment of Hezekiah that I see in Scripture is what he says in verse 8 of chapter 39. The man of God has come to him, and he has said, you have made a terrible mistake here. Your family is going to suffer because of what you did. And this almost seems like a snide response to me. It says, then said Hezekiah to Isaiah, good is the word of the Lord which thou hast spoken. He said, moreover, for there shall be peace and truth in my days. In other words, Hezekiah lacked the spiritual vision to understand what came on past him. And I can't think of a worse thing to say about a man or a woman or a grandma or a grandpa or a church or a country or a state or anything that we lack the vision to see beyond here and now. Right. We've got to be able to do that. Jonathan Adams has to be able to do that for his son, for his grandchildren, for whoever. Cavenders Street Church has to be able to do that. We have to have the spiritual vision that we need. And there's only one place to get that, and that's through the Lord. Right? As 1 Corinthians 13 says, for now we see through a glass darkly. That's the best we can do. But God sees it all. Yeah. And had Hezekiah gone to Isaiah, and had he done it the right way, he would have gotten the instruction that he needed to understand there's a better way to handle this situation that doesn't cause me pain. Of course, we've heard the reference here many times to Proverbs. I want to read it to you, Proverbs 29:18. Where there is no vision, the people perish, but he that keepeth the law, happy is he. We must have that spiritual vision. We must keep it all the time. We have been, as a country, we have been blessed beyond measure. We've been blessed materially, we've been blessed physically, we've been blessed politically. But we're also really focused on right now. That's all we care about. I can tell you right now, my kids, what are we going to eat after church? Right? And then there's nothing, to a point, there's nothing wrong with that. That's human nature. That's how we are. But we have to fight that flesh. We have to fight that desire to do that, and we must look beyond. There is more to this thing than what you see right now. There is a hell to shun. There is a heaven to gain, and it's done every single day. It's not just done on the mountaintops. It's not just done with Sennacheribs at the gates. It's not just done when you're sick unto death. The real fight for your testimony, in my opinion, is every day. It's what you do when you wake up on Monday morning. It's when you don't feel like it. It's what you do on Thursday when it's raining. That is the difference. Anybody can show up one day and say the right things and put on the right clothes and make it sound good. It's what you do that matters. And how you do it every single day. And I will say I appreciate the mentors, the examples that we've had in our church. We have had men and women who do it every single day. And they didn't do it loudly. They didn't wear a sign saying, look at me. They just did it. And they did it on Monday. And you've seen them out at Walmart on Monday. They were the same people that they were on Sunday night of revival. Same people. Yeah. And I appreciate that. And I appreciate the example that's why Cavender Street is here. If we want Cavender Street to be here 50 years from now, I better do that today. I have to do that today. That is why. It is not an accident. The church did not mysteriously appear, and we don't mysteriously show up on random Sundays at 10 o'clock. It doesn't happen that way. It happens because people cared enough to make it happen.
And Jonathan, you don't have to be old to do that. I was up around Mount Pisgah last week, and I was coming back, and I wanted to go by the young man that was killed, Marvin Martin's and Joanne's grandson. And I was talking to a guy there that was at the funeral. And I told him I didn't know the boy, but from what I understand, just a great guy. And he said, you would not believe the testimonies that he heard from young people. And he said the one that struck him the most was this girl said, he showed me what a Christian's life is supposed to be like. And he was, 20 years old? Yeah. What a testimony, that young man.
That's right. The Lord equips everybody to do that. If you've been saved, you've got a job to do.
Right.
That's it. That is it. Being saved is not the end, it is the beginning. And I hope I'm able to live as he was. That's a wonderful testimony to have. It really is. Yes. To just sum it up here, you put Hezekiah's weaknesses together: pride, self-absorption, and lack of vision. Yet you have a toxic fruit of flaws that cause Hezekiah to make a terrible mistake. It endangers his nation and his family by by ceasing to acknowledge God's blessings and claiming it as his own works instead. And again, I just reiterate, there's no mention of God in Hezekiah's narrative to the Babylonians. I just can't say that enough. I'm trying to make sure I don't go too long. I've been bad to do that. I got 10 minutes to hurry. There were consequences of Hezekiah's sin. And I'm going to go over those briefly because, again, this is the last time we're going to have a chance to do this tonight. We're going to prophecy after this. So what were the consequences of Hezekiah's sin? And it was sin. The immediate consequence was that Hezekiah failed to pass on his faith. I refer you to 2 Kings 21, 1 through 3. Briefly, I can read it to you if you. His son's name was Manasseh. And note that Manasseh was not yet born when this episode took place. And we know this because of the first line in 2 Kings 21. Manasseh was 12 years old when he began to reign. Again, Hezekiah was sick unto death 15 years before he died. This was immediately after that. So Manasseh was born 2 or 3 years after this story. Okay, I'll also point out to you there is no mention of Hezekiah in the Bible until he dies. After this story in Isaiah 39, that's supplemented in Chronicles and Kings. This is the last word on Hezekiah. Think about that. Think about being 40 years old. And think about all the wonderful things he did. But the last word you have on Hezekiah, he was 40, and he's done all these wonderful things, and now he's resting on his laurels because, well, it's going to be peace in my time. What a horrible thing. Yeah. What a horrible... He knew how much time he had left, right? He had 15 years left. What could he have done in those 15 years? We'll never know. I bet Hezekiah wondered when he got to the end, though, don't you? Anyway, that struck me really hard reading this. Was you don't see anything else about Hezekiah after he was 40, and that's hard for me. But anyway, Manasseh was 12 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 50 and 5 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Hespibah, and he did that which was evil in the sight of the Lord, after the abominations of the heathen, whom the Lord cast out before the children of Israel. For he built up again the high places which Hezekiah his father had destroyed, and reared up altars for Baal, and made a grove, and did Ahab king of Israel, and worshipped all the host of heavens, and served them. In other words, Hezekiah's testimony didn't even resonate with his own son, did it? That was part of what this sin wrought. Hezekiah was a great king. I mean, we read it. He was a great king. We're not just paying lip service that he was, but how great are you if you can't pass down what you have? Yeah. Your spiritual inheritance matters. Of course, we can't get saved for people. No one can do that. Everyone has to accept it on their own. But we do have a spiritual heritage here at Cavenders Creek. We live in the buckle of the Bible Belt. This area of the country has a special spiritual inheritance from the Lord. He has blessed us beyond measure in ways that we can't describe. We have a responsibility and a duty and an obligation to do everything we can to show our children and the people around us what the Lord has done for us. Let's not be like Hezekiah. Let's not just live and let live. You can't make people get saved. You can't do that. But you can point them in the right direction. You can point quite forcefully at times too. And we should do everything we can. Everything. If I'm going to err, I'm going to err on the side of overpointing, not underpointing. Right. And I think Hezekiah, when he got to the end, wished that he had done that. But that was the immediate consequence of Hezekiah's sin and his view of what the Lord had done for him, as explicated in Isaiah 39. He failed to pass it on to his own son. I can't imagine the pain of that. And the second and more lasting effect of the sin is this was Judah's last golden era. This was it. This was the last best chance to save that kingdom. Now Hezekiah didn't know that, but God did. That's what Isaiah was telling. That's what Isaiah is telling him. So behold, the days come in verse 6, that all that is in thy house, and thine which thy fathers have laid up in store to this day, shall be carried to Babylon. Nothing shall be left, saith the Lord. In other words, you just blew our last great chance, Hezekiah. And again, this was a good man. This was not, we're not talking about one of the evil kings of Judah. This was a great man. This was one of the best kings Judah had, and he still did this. What are you and I capable of? I don't think I have the faith of Hezekiah. And look what he did. We're all susceptible to this if we're not careful. So let's look at historically what happened. Hezekiah died in about 15 years. Manasseh, his son, reigned 55 years. What happened to Manasseh? He was very evil. I read you that part of it. Tradition says, you read your King James Bible, does not say this. Tradition holds, though, he was drugged to Nineveh by his nose. They had a hook in his nose and they drugged him all the way. That's what happened to Manasseh for his sin. What happened to Manasseh? He then turned away from some of the evil. He came back. The Lord restored his throne. So perhaps some of what Hezekiah did rubbed off on him. But that was a pretty violent episode in Manasseh's life. I think we'd all agree. I would not want to have to walk a couple hundred miles with a chain in my nose. The next one was Amon. He served 2 years. He was the grandson of Hezekiah. And he was so evil, his servants conspired against him and killed him in his own house. After reigning 2 years, he was 22 when he started reigning. He died when he was 24. Hezekiah's great-grandson was Josiah, the last quote-unquote good king of Israel. He followed loosely in the ways Hezekiah also followed, but he also failed to follow the Lord in his political decisions, and he died in battle fighting the Pharaoh of Egypt. He reigned 31 years. So now we're down to Hezekiah's great-grandchildren. Both of them had a tough time. Jehoaz, who was Josiah's son, reigned just 3 months. He was then defeated by the Egyptian Pharaoh, and he was placed in chains by the Egyptian Pharaoh and lived out his days that way. His brother, who was also Hezekiah's great-grandson, Jehoiakim, if I'm saying that correctly, served 11 years. He was but we can say he's king, but in name only. He was installed by a Pharaoh. He was then a vassal to the Babylonians. He rebelled. The Babylonians came, and that was the first conquest of Jerusalem. He was dragged in chains to Babylon. That was Hezekiah's great-great-grandsons. Then Jehoiakim's son, Jehoiachin, if I'm saying that correctly, was just 8 when he reigned. That was at the end of Jehoiakim's reign when the Babylonians were besieging the city. He reigned 3 months as an 8-year-old, but even then, as an 8-year-old, he did which was evil in the sight of the Lord. According to 2 Kings, he was also taken to Babylon in chains and taken to Nebuchadnezzar. Then, finally, Nebuchadnezzar installed Zedekiah, his brother, also a great-grandson of Hezekiah. He rebelled against Nebuchadnezzar, and he also was dragged to Babylon in chains. So we have his son dragged through Nineveh with a nose ring and a chain a couple hundred miles. A grandson who was killed by his servants. A great-grandson who died in battle. And his great-great and great-great-great-grandsons all took the long walk to Babylon in chains. Now, not all of that was Hezekiah's fault. That's unfair. We have free will. Each of his children had available to him the law of Moses, just as Hezekiah did. Hezekiah's daddy wasn't a particularly good man. You can read about him too. Hezekiah came to the knowledge of how he should have behaved. And so it's not fair to say all of that was Hezekiah's fault. But I think it is fair to say that Hezekiah had quite a bit to do with it. He knew better. He had found the way, and he failed to pass that way along. And let me make sure I've got my years right. In approximately 95 years, his kingdom was all but extinguished. It was a vassal state. And in 107 years, his line was ended. When Zedekiah was dethroned, his children were killed in front of him, and then Nebuchadnezzar put out his eyes. And that was the end of Hezekiah's line. That happened 106 years after Hezekiah. I don't say that to be gruesome. I don't say that to be mean. I say that to say the failure to pass down your faith has enormous consequences. Right. And I don't think any of us want to see what those consequences might be. No. I'm sure that if Hezekiah could do it over, now that he's seen what happened, he would have done it differently. But it's too late now. And I'm sure that the words that he said, that I will tell you, when I think of things that I've done, I'll hurry here. I often hear, when you say something stupid, I can play it in my mind. Man, I wish I hadn't said that. Man, I wish I don't remember when other people say dumb things. I remember when I say dumb things. And I can't think of a dumber thing than to say, good is the word of the Lord which has spoken. He said, moreover, for there shall be peace and truth in my days. Yippee, yippee, yippee. Right? And what is your life? It is a vapor. It appeared for just a short time. It's gone. Yeah. It's gone. Yeah. So our takeaways. Hezekiah's pride and lack of vision was fatal for his line. Let's not be that. Let it not be so for us. Let's seek the will of God in every situation. He's the God of the big things, but He's the God of the little things too. And again, as I've said before, we have a heritage of faith. Let's not let it go. Hezekiah had the same thing, didn't he? That's what he had. He could reach back. He was just close enough down the line. He could reach back and grab David and Solomon, but he didn't. He didn't make the line strong enough to where his kids could do the same thing. Right. And that was just a terrible thing. But I don't want to leave you with a terrible vision of Hezekiah. That's not fair. And it draws an important parallel to today. We see folks today that they want to point to one bad thing that a historical figure did, and we want to cancel everything that person did. That's not right. And that's not fair. The Bible has equipped us here to look at history the right way. The right way to look at history is to celebrate the wonderful things that Hezekiah did. Hezekiah was a great man. Hezekiah was a great king. He turned away from all the idols of his daddy and his granddaddy, and he did that what was right. And when all the chips were on the line, I mean, again, remember, Israel was wiped out by the Assyrians. I mean, gone. They were just interdispersed with the Assyrian Empire. But Hezekiah was the man of God who stood up. Right. What a testimony that is. Like I said, we read the testimony in 2 Kings just a little while ago. It's not fair to just whitewash this guy because of this thing he did that was bad towards the end of his reign, and didn't just take away his entire testimony. But it is a stain. It is a scar, and it's something that he had to live with. And I think that gives us good context for how we should look at other historical figures and actions. Take the Bible's perspective and look at the whole thing. And if we do that, we'll get a good view of that man. We'll get a good view of ourselves in the context of that man, and we'll do better off. We'll be better off. Right. Anyway, that's all I've got. Appreciate y'all listening to me.
Good.
Clark will be back soon.